Hello, sixth graders. We are in our fractions unit. Today's lesson is on multiplying fractions. Learning target you need to write down is I can multiply fractions and mixed numbers. Okay, some vocab here that we need to make sure to write down. Stuff we know, but we still need to record it in our notes. The numerator, this is the top number in a fraction. Very important right here, represents the part. So if we're talking about part of a number, that's our numerator. So 5/9, the numerator would be the 5. The denominator, the bottom number in a fraction, represents the whole. So if we were talking about a pizza and 5/9, 5 is part of the pizza, 9 would be the whole. Improper fraction, this is when the top number is bigger than the bottom number, represents more than one whole. So if we had 8/3, that's more than one. It's an improper fraction. A mixed number is a fraction with a whole number and a fraction. This is the simplified form of an improper fraction. So if we have an improper fraction like 3/8, I would write it as a mixed number, 2 and 2/3. And the 2/3 needs to be in simplest form. So if I had something like 5 and 3/9, we would need to simplify the 3/9 for a mixed number. Okay, so make sure you have all of this vocab written down. Okay, so today we are looking at multiplying fractions and mixed numbers, so we need to write these steps down. Number 1, write any mixed number as an improper fraction. Step 2, put a 1 under any whole numbers. So if we have 5, we would write that as 5/1. Then you multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators, and then simplify your answers. Okay, so in this box is what it just told us on that last page with our steps. Multiply numerators and then multiply the denominators in order to multiply fractions. So if we have 1/2 times 1/3, we multiply the ones. 1 times 1 is 1. And then we multiply the denominators. 2 times 3 is 6. And then you would simplify if you can, but 1/6 is already in simplest form, so that would be your answer. Okay, little visual here of it. We had the 1/6, or the 1/3, sorry, and then we were taking half of that amount, which is just 1/6 of it. Here's another one. This was in our steps on the last page, that with our whole numbers, when you're multiplying them, you write the whole number as a fraction with a denominator of 1. So we would first rewrite this as 2/1 times 3/4. Now we multiply our numerators. 2 times 3 is 6. Then multiply the denominators. 1 times 4 is 4. Now I have an improper fraction here, so I need to turn that to a mixed number. 4 goes into 6 ones, which is 4, and I have 2/4 left over. Simplify that, divide the top and bottom by 2, and we end up with 1 and 1/2. There's your final answer. Okay. Another visual, you have 2 wholes, and we are looking at 3/4 of them, which would be 1 and 1/2. Okay, pause, write down the original problem, and then solve these, and then come back and check your answer. So 3/5 times 1/2, they are both in fraction form. We don't have any mixed numbers on here, so we just multiply numerators. 3 times 1 is 3. Multiply denominators. 5 times 2 is 10. That cannot be simplified at all, so there is my final answer. Next one, 1/3 times 3/4, multiply tops. 1 times 3 is 3. Multiply bottoms. 3 times 4 is 12. I know I can divide both of these by 3, which would be 1/4. That is in simplest form. Next one, we have a whole number here, so 2/3 times 4/1 to write it as a fraction. Now we multiply numerators. 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 1 is 3. Improper fraction, let's turn it to a mixed number. 3 goes into 8 twice, which is 3 times 2 would be 6. So that means that there's 2/3 left over, simplest form. Okay, now there's a way to make this even easier by looking for what I call shortcuts. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at these fractions that we're going to multiply, and we are going to see if there's any numbers that we can divide them by or simplify. So if we have something here like 2 7s and 3 8s, so you could multiply 2 times 3 and then 7 times 8, but then you're going to have to simplify at the end. Instead, what you can do is you can look at the numbers that are diagonal from each other, so the 2 and the 8, and the 3 and the 7. Okay, so let's start by looking, actually I'm going to erase this here. I'm going to start by looking at the 2 and the 8 like I started with there. And I'm going to look and see, is there any number that both 2 and 8 can be divided by? And I'm going to look here, it was talking about the greatest common factor. That's the biggest number that goes into both of them. And I know the greatest common factor of 2 and 8 is 2. So I'm going to divide both of these by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I'm going to cross them out and think of them now as 1 and 4. Then I go to the other diagonals, 3 and 7. The only thing that they can both be divided by is 1. So we can't simplify those at all. Now we take the 1 and 3, and that's what we multiply. 1 times 3 is 3. 7 times 4 is 28. Okay, and now there's no number that 3 or 28 could be divided by, so that is in simplest form. Where if we didn't do the shortcuts and we just multiplied right away and we did 2 times 3 is 6, 7 times 8 is 56, then I would have to simplify, which is 3 over 28. So by doing the shortcuts at the beginning, it helps you to skip a step, which sometimes doesn't seem like a lot, like here just dividing by 2, but there's other times that if we don't do the shortcuts, we end up with this really huge fraction at the end, which makes our simplifying more difficult. So look for those shortcuts. Okay, so on these 3, I want you to try them on your own, looking for shortcuts. Try them and then come back. Okay, so looking at my diagonals here, between 1 and 7, there's nothing that they can both be divided by other than 1, so I'm going to ignore those. Whereas the 3's here, I can simplify by dividing them both by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, 3 divided by 3 is 1. Now I multiply. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 7 is 7. So my answer, now it's already in simplest form, 1/7. Next one here, 1 and 9, nothing that they can be simplified, but 4 and 8, they can both be divided by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 9 times 2 is 18, which again, if we didn't simplify, we would have gotten 4 over 72, and then we would have had to do some division here in order to simplify. So the shortcuts will help with that. Next one, the 5's. I know I can divide both of these by 5, which is 1. And the 3 and 6, I can divide both of those by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So now I can multiply 1 times 1, which is 1. And 2 times 1 is 2. 1/2 already in simplest form, instead of simplifying at the end. Okay, so now if we have mixed numbers, the first step that we need to do is turn them to an improper fraction. So 1/2 stays the same. To turn 4 and 2/5 into an improper fraction, you take the denominator 5 and you multiply it by the whole number to figure out how many fifths you have. So 5 times 4 is 20. So you have 20/5 plus these other 2/5, which is 22. So that would be 22, and our denominator is fifths, so it would be over 5. Now, 1/2 times 22 over 5. I'm going to look for shortcuts here. I know 2 and 22 can both be divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 22 divided by 2 is 11. 1 times 11 is 11. 1 times 5 is 5. Now I have an improper fraction, got to turn it back into a mixed number. 5 goes into 11 twice, which would be 10, so 1/5 left over. There's my final answer. Just something for you to know here. If you forget to simplify before multiplying, which is what I did, you can always simplify your answer at the end. But it's a lot easier if you are simplifying before you multiply. Okay, so 3 that I want you to pause, try on your own, and then come back. Make sure you turn those mixed numbers into an improper fraction first. All right, so 1/4 times 8 and 4/9. So we got to turn that 8 and 4/9 into an improper fraction. Take 9 times the 8, which is 72, plus 4 is 76 over 9, and 1/4. I'm going to simplify. I know that I can divide 4 by 2, and I know that I can divide 76 divided by 2, which is 38. I can divide those again by 2, so that would be 1, and then 38 divided by 2 is 19. So now 1 times 19 is 19, 1 times 9 is 9. Turn this back into an improper, or a mixed number. 9 goes into 19 twice with 1 left over out of 9. 2 and 1/9. And again, if you didn't do the shortcuts like I did at the beginning, you would have just had to simplify at the end. 5 and 1/3 times 3. Turn this into a improper fraction. 3 times 5, so we've got 15/3 so far, plus this one up above, which is 16/3. Whole numbers we put over 1. And also your multiplication is a little bit more difficult if you don't simplify. So you would have to do 16 times 3, where if I did my shortcuts or my simplifying right now, 3 can both be divided, or both of the 3's can be divided by 3. Now 16 times 1, 1 times 1. Any whole number over 1 is just whatever that whole number is. So 16. Okay. Last one, 2 mixed numbers to turn to improper fractions. 8 times 8, or 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 is 15 over 8. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12, 12 over 5. Looking for shortcuts here, both of these can be divided by 5, and 8 and 12 can both be divided by 4, which is 2 and 3. 3 times 3 is 9, 2 times 1 is 2. 2 goes into 9 4 times, which is 8, with 1 left over. Okay, we've got an application problem here. Sophia wishes to make 1/2 of a recipe. If the original recipe calls for 3 3/4 cup of flour, how many cups should she use? So we are trying to figure out what is 1/2 of something. That's telling us that we are going to multiply. So we're trying to figure out what half of 3 3/4 is. Turn that 3 3/4 into an improper fraction by multiplying and adding. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 3 is 15/4 times 1/2. No shortcuts on this one, so 15 times 1 is 15. 4 times 2 is 8. Turning this back into a mixed number, that would be 1 and 7/8. So she would use 1 and 7/8 cups of flour. Okay, that's the end of our multiplying fractions video. Remember, if you are stuck or confused, go back and re-watch the parts that were confusing to you. You can always practice on iExcel. Otherwise, come with questions tomorrow to class.